Hello everybody and welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Brittany and on this channel we talk all about plants. And today I did want to talk a little bit about this super cool plant, everyone's favorite starter plant, everyone's favorite elevate the space plant, the snake plant. So we are going to talk a little bit about care, a little bit about problems that may occur with your snake plant, and also talk about why they are so cool, so popular. So if you are into plants and into caring for plants and into decorating with plants, stick around and let's talk snake plants. Okay, first things first, let's talk about why snake plants are so popular. And this is great if you are considering purchasing a snake plant, purchasing a second snake plant, if you've just been wondering why we all love them so much. Here are a couple reasons. First one being the maintenance of these plants. They're super low maintenance. They can go weeks without being watered. They can survive in a variety of lighting situations, whether that be a lower light or a bright, sometimes direct light. They do live, I've been told in the comments, in Florida, in the United States, naturally, and they grow really big and strong. So they're very resilient to most conditions. The second reason, you've probably heard, these are air purifying plants. So they absorb toxins within their leaves, and then at night they release oxygen into the environment. So they're really great for bedrooms, because who doesn't want oxygen released into the air in their bedroom while they're sleeping? They're fantastic for that reason. The third reason is that they're so versatile. You can have huge snake plants in your room that are really mature, tons of leaves, tons of varieties of colors, and you can also have tiny desk ones like this little moonshine snake plant. So they kind of work in a variety of areas. The fourth reason I think that they are so popular is because they don't look like any other plants that we have in our houses. These really pointy structural leaves give a really different look if you're putting them with, your Monstera and your ZZ and your pothos. It's something that is different and eye-catching, and it kind of is a breed of its own. And then the last reason I think that they are so popular is the resiliency. So if you're somebody that travels a lot or is a forgetter of water or is like tough on plants, these are great for you. But also, if you are not one that wants to deal with all the hubbub of plants like pests and issues related to that, they're very resilient to those type of things. So there is definitely a chance that every plant can get pests, but if you just take care of this guy, he's usually going to live through it. He's going to make it. So you're not going to kill it. I think that that's why it's one of the most popular plants. Okay, so now that we know why we should own a snake plant, we're all on the same page, we love them. Let's talk a little bit about how to care for them so they stick around for a really long time. The first thing that I want to talk about is potting. When you are receiving your snake plant, it's oftentimes not in an appropriate soil, especially if you're going big box store. So really consider what kind of plant this is. It's technically a succulent, like a cactus sort of plant. So you want it to be in a really chunky cactus soil. You can add things like perlite and orchid bark into it to encourage drainage of the water. So I would really think about repotting or really analyzing the soil when you first get this pot, and also as it continues to grow, making sure that it's not becoming so dense that it's holding on to water. The other thing is You don't want a humongous pot for a little bitty plant. You may think that that's going to encourage it to grow really big. Not the case though with this guy and with most plants. You really only want a pot that's 1 to 2 inches bigger than the ball of roots. And this is going to allow the soil to dry out so as not to rot. And snake plants, even more than most plants, like to be a little bit cozy and snug in their pot, even to the point that they're like busting out of the pot. They're going to be totally fine. So make sure that you find an appropriate pot and appropriate soil for this plant. The second thing is right along with that, watering. This takes very little water because it stores its water in these big, huge leaves. So really checking the soil, whether that be with a moisture meter or I just use like a wooden skewer, poke all the way down to the bottom of the pot. Really try to avoid those roots so that you're not causing any damage. If you pull it out and it's got soil sticking to the skewer, it's not quite dried out yet, give it a little bit of time. If you are overwatering, that's where you get rotting, and these guys are really susceptible to that. So less care in terms of watering is better. If you want something that you can care for a little bit more, go and get like a leafier plant. With that being said, in the winter months or when it gets cooler, you're going to want to cut back even more and really make sure that you're checking because it's utilizing less water in those less growing months. So really make sure that you're looking at that. Another way to tell that they need water is if you bend the leaf and it feels really pliable, it might be time to water. If it feels really tough, like it's holding its own, it's still holding that moisture in those leaves. So you can just know it's okay to back off of that. Okay, the third thing in terms of care is light. And while people tend to get this because it is considered a low light plant, that only means that it can survive in low light. If you want a plant that's really thriving, growing, pushing new leaves, you're going to want to give it bright, indirect light. So that means near a window or near a grow light where it can really see the light, and a filtered light at that. If you choose to put it outside in bright, direct light, there can be some burning of the leaves. So I would consider not putting it directly in the sun just right off the bat. You can try and acclimate it and slowly put it in the sunlight. Just make sure that you're checking those leaves, that they're not burning, scorching, discoloring. If your plant starts to lean toward the light, like it looks like it's leaning in one direction, that means that it's searching for more light. It's wanting more of that. So I would consider moving a little bit closer to the window or to the grow light, whatever it is that you're using. Number 4 in terms of care is temperature and humidity. So these guys like to be between 60 and 80 degrees. So try not to put them directly next to a window in those cooler months, directly over a heating vent in those heater months. And then humidity, they don't love a ton of humidity. They're kind of deserty. So you don't need to be like misting them. Don't do that. It can cause damage to the leaves. And just your regular old household humidity is totally fine. They're going to be fine with that. Okay, number 5 is fertilizer. So you can, especially during the growing season, use a fertilizer, usually monthly, every 4 to 6 weeks. If you do see some burning of the leaves, back off of the fertilizer. And if you see a stunted growth pattern, you might consider upping your fertilizer. In the winter seasons, especially if you're in a cooler place, you can back off that fertilizer unless you have it in a circumstance that it's going to continue to grow. I've said this in past videos, if we care for our plants correctly, they don't have to go through a hibernation season. They can continue to grow and thrive if we're giving them proper light, proper humidity, proper fertilization. So you just have to kind of get to know your plant. I would not fertilize this as often as I fertilize some of my prolific growing leafy plants, but just get to know your plant and what it is asking for from you. Number 6 is about repotting. So all of our plants are going to do better if we repot them in that spring, summer growing season. So really think about that. This does not read repotted very often unless it was repotted in too small of a pot. Usually that's going to be like every couple to few years that you're repotting it. Make sure that you are finding a pot that's 1 to 2 sizes bigger than the root ball. Don't overdo it. Make sure that you have a pot that has drainage on the bottom. You want that water flowing all the way through that chunky cactus soil that we talked about, or that you can place into a bowl of water and it can soak up through the bottom watering. So make sure that you have drainage on there if you want something pretty that matches your aesthetic and your decor style. Put it into a nursery pot that has the drainage, and then just place that nursery pot into a decorative pot. Then you just pull it out when it's time to water and just pop it back in when you're done. What are we? 7? Number 7, I think, is about pest control. If you do happen to get pests on your snake plant, it tends to be fairly uncommon. If you just spray it with a little bit of neem oil and kind of allow that to do the job for you, it tends to be okay. You do want to isolate any plant that has a pest issue away from the rest of your plants so as not to spread the pests. They will get mealybugs, they will get spider mites every once in a while. So really, when you're watering, I always say check the leaves, check the underside of the leaves, check the soil to see if there's anything that looks abnormal. If you have stunted growth, browning that doesn't make sense, really kind of analyze whether it could be a pest problem. But I've not ever had an issue with my snake plant, and I do think it's fairly uncommon. Sorry, buddy. It's fairly uncommon to see pests on snake plants, but if you do, you're gonna be okay. He's not gonna die. He's not gonna, need to go in the trash, as long as you catch it on time and then treat it appropriately. Okay, number 7, and the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of care of snake plants is propagating. Now, these can be really easy to propagate because of the way that they grow. So there's like the mother plant, and then off of that will grow, it literally looks like this, new chunks of plant, and you can unpot your plant, kind of find one of those pieces that has grown off of the base plant, break it off and replant it. It should have roots, it should have some establishment. So if you have a really big, thick one like this, it's really easy to just pop it off, repot it, give it to your friend, give it to your mom, put it in another place in your house, take it to work. Another way that you can propagate is by cutting the leaf. So taking sterilized scissors, chopping it. I like to cut mine at an angle, so the top is angled like this. I like to cut it at an angle in the same direction, like so. That way there's just more surface room for roots to grow from. I think that the internet tends to say it's really easy. You just place this cutting of this plant into a cup of water, into soil, and in a few weeks, you'll have new roots and you'll have a new plant. We in the plant community know that this is not necessarily the case. Some people have a great time and it goes really well, and some people just cannot get past that rotting that happens to the leaf. So I did have a really successful propagation just recently, and I say recently meaning like a year. It's been the last year. So this is what this looks like. So you can see it has a ton of new stalks, and that's what I was talking about. In terms of the stalks growing off of the base plant. Look at, and I could at this point just pop those little stalks off and grow them in soil because they do have their own root system. But let me tell you what specifically I did, and I'm not saying that this works, and I'm not saying that I'm the snake plant like propagation guru, but I did cut mine at an angle, and then I placed it into a cup of water. I first dunked it into a rooting powder, placed it into water, and then for the first probably month or two, I was changing the water out every day, putting new rooting powder on there and replacing it into the cup literally every day. And there's no reason. It's just the way that I happen to do it. And then I started seeing some little roots popping through. And after that, I backed off on the replacement of water. And then after that, it kind of took off, and it's been about a year, and I never replace the water at this point. I just refill it. You do want to make sure that you are giving new water because that provides oxygen, H2O, right? And the plant does need that oxygen, or it does better if you give it new oxygen. So I'm pretty proud of this little guy. It's pretty cool. I am not going to pot it up at this point. I'll give you a close-up of it too. Because it just seems like it's doing totally fine in water. And if you have a snake plant in water, that's just like an established plant that lives in water, let us know how it's doing, because I'm really considering just letting it be like a water plant and just doing full hydro for this one. So if you have any advice or you have any background, creating a water plant out of your snake plant, let me know. And if you think it's a really bad idea, also let me know. All right, last things last about snake plants, because I know we are getting a little bit lengthy here, is if you do start seeing issues, what is the cause? So the first issue that I want to talk about is yellowing of leaves. If your leaves start getting droopy, yellowing, they're starting to look like there's an issue, it is almost always with snake plants due to overwatering. So you are going to want to back off the water. Like I said, make sure that you're checking the soil prior to watering every time. And if it really seems like it's bad, a repot might be your best bet. So taking it out, removing all that really wet soil, and placing it into new dry soil and giving it a little bit of time to allow those roots to dry out. The second issue that you might see is browning tips, where the tips look like they're just starting to let go. And you might be like, I remember when Brittany said not to water too much, but you can also underwater. And while you can get root rot from overwatering, you can get what's called dry rot from underwatering, which is where the roots just start to kind of like disintegrate off because they are not being nourished enough. So you might have a watering issue there as well. These are resilient as heck, but they also, are a living plant, and they know what they need. So you might be underwatering. There may not be enough humidity. If you have it out on your porch in the summer, the heat might be too high where it's dissolving or using up that water way quicker than you anticipated. So really kind of look at if it's really dried out, peek at those roots and see if they're having an issue if you have browning tips. The next thing that you might notice is really leggy growth, where they're like growing in one direction or growing really long but not like substantial, you want the leaves to have some sustenance to them so that they are able to hold on to that water. And this is probably a lighting issue. If they're leaning toward their light, they're stretching themselves out to get to the light, they're not becoming a hardy leaf. So if they're getting really leggy, really look at your lighting situation, move it closer to the window, move it closer to the grow light, and give it just a little bit more of that photosynthesis that it wants. And then the last thing that is really common in snake plants, especially for beginners, is called leaf rot. Can you hear Penny crying in the background? Mom, it's dinner time. Sorry. Is leaf rot. And that is where you might see some like mushiness to the leaf, especially lower down toward the soil. And that is probably a surefire sign that you've overwatered. Your roots are rotting out and you really are at the point where you need new soil, and to the point that you might actually have to cut those roots off, propagate, and start over. That's like, it's far. We're almost gone at that point if you're getting leaf rot. The rot's moving up the plant. So if this was helpful, and if you are thinking about getting a snake plant or you love snake plants and you just wanted a couple extra pointers to keep them happy and healthy, let me know. And also share your tips and your stories down in the comments below. I do want to do a couple life updates and then we are out of here. So thank you so much for sticking around. This was a long one, and I hope to see you back in the next video. So make sure that you do subscribe.